In the high valley where mountains cradle the sky, a city rose without a crown. No king's decree declared its founding. No single hand shaped its destiny. Instead, a multitude of voices, calloused by labor and comforted by ritual, wove together stones and spirit to create something greater than themselves. Here, under the vast dome of heaven, temples stretched toward the light. Plazas opened wide, inviting all, merchant and pilgrim, artisan and priest, to witness the pulse of humanity. Every carved glyph, every painted wall, spoke of a belief both intimate and infinite. They called it the place where gods were born. We call it Teotihuacan. This is the story of the builders, the nameless hands that lifted the first stone, the dreamers who envisioned a city beyond horizons, the keepers of flame who kept faith alive. Their triumph was not a monument to power, but a testament to possibility. Join us on this journey. Explore the stones that still whisper beneath our feet. Discover the heartbeat of a civilization that reached for the sun. And if you feel moved, stay with us. Like and subscribe for more tales from the ancient world. The dawn breaks cold over the valley. A pale light spills across the earth, revealing gentle slopes and distant peaks. Here, long before banners flew and before stones were cut, there were people, hunters and gatherers, following deer through grasslands. Their footsteps were fleeting, marked only by memory. Then, around a river bend, discovery. A river that brimmed with promise, water for fields, clay for bricks, obsidian for blades. They returned in greater numbers. Families settled. Fields appeared where wild grasses had swayed. A settlement emerged. Humble huts clustered by the riverbank, smoke curling from hearths, children's laughter echoing through reeds. Time passed. Children grew into masons, masons into architects. They learned to shape sun-dried bricks into sturdy walls. They learned geometry by lining up sticks in the earth. They learned ceremony by painting cliffs with red and yellow pigments. Each knowledge passed by voice and by hand. On a morning thick with mist, the first formal plaza was laid out, a leveled clearing framed by upright poles bound with cloth. Around it, the people gathered, women in woven skirts, men bearing water jugs, elders clutching staffs carved with serpents. A fire was lit at the center, its smoke rising like a pillar to the sky. A priest spoke in low tones. Stones were blessed. Hands touched the earth. The city was born in intention as much as in shape. The plaza expanded. Paths radiated outward, guiding footfalls through open grass, then into newly erected walls of stone. Those stones came from hills miles away, burdened on backs and shoulders, carried by men who sang as they walked. Their song was simple, a chant to coax strength into sinew, unity into collective breath. Each stone that arrived bore the imprint of countless hands. Bit by bit, the settlement grew into a grid, a network of streets aligned to the rising sun and the passing seasons. Dwellings rose in orderly rows, workshops clustered near the plazas. The river still flowed, now bridged by wooden planks, channeling water into terraces for maize. The valley blossomed into a tapestry of gardens, courtyards, and sacred enclosures. As the city expanded, so did its purpose. No longer just a home, it became a crucible of ideas. Craftsmen experimented with pigments and fired pottery. Weavers spun cotton into cloth dyed with cochineal. Traders arrived from distant hills, bearing jade and seashells that had crossed deserts and rivers. Each arrival left a mark, an exotic bead here, a carved figurine there, woven into the city's unfolding story.
But with growth came the need for vision. A generation of planners emerged, those who saw not only what was, but what could be. They measured the angles of the plaza against the horizon. They arranged temples in strict relation to the sun's path. They carved the faces of deities on massive stones, ensuring each gaze aligned with dawn or dusk. Their work spoke of belief as much as function. By the time the sun stood high in the sky, the transformation was complete. A city of stone and earth, of ritual and commerce, of dreams cast into geometry. It was neither palace nor fortress, but something more enduring, a canvas for human aspiration. Here, every corner held a purpose, every wall told a story, and every pathway led toward both the mundane and the divine. And in that moment, the builders paused. They stepped back to admire their creation under the afternoon light, a mosaic of fire, stone, and sky. They felt the hum of possibility in the wind that swept down the nearby peaks. They felt, too, the weight of responsibility to maintain, to expand, to honor what they had begun. This city would shape them as surely as they had shaped it. And in the centuries to come, even as names faded and stones crumbled, that heartbeat would endure, a testament to the courage of builders who dared to envision a metropolis not yet imagined.
Before dawn's light crept over the eastern peaks, the valley was already alive with breath and determination. Torches flickered at the edge of a limestone outcrop, casting wavering shadows on rock faces. Here, at the heart of Teotihuacan, the first quarry stood, an ancient scar in the earth where builders coaxed stone from the mountain's blood. The task began in silence. Elder masons knelt by the ledge, running their fingers across the stone's rough grain. They traced natural fissures, mapping weak lines where water and fire could work in unison. Young apprentices readied tools, chert chisels glinting in the low light, wooden mallets polished smooth by decades of use. Each knew their role, the master guiding, the apprentice learning, each breath in time with hammer's tap. A single tap, and then another. Soon the rhythm spread. Dozens of chisels struck limestone in overlapping beats, like rain on the temple roof. Clouds drifted above, gray at first, then tinged pink as the sun's edge peeked over the horizon. In that moment, sky and earth collaborated. The light unveiled the quarry's contours. The workers unveiled their resolve. Water carriers arrived with gourds of fresh river flow. They doused cracks, letting liquid seep into the stone's veins. As the sun rose, they returned with torches wrapped in damp reeds. Flames licked the rock face. Heat expanded the stone's grains. When the reed bundles were removed, the surface cracked along the water's path. The engineers of stone smiled, physics as ally. By mid-morning, what had been part of the living mountain lay freed. A block nearly 10 feet long, heavy enough to quiver the earth when moved. The master mason climbed atop it, hand on chisel surveying his prize. He called for rollers, logs of cedar and oak that the woodcutters had felled at a nearby grove. Under his direction, teams of laborers scraped bark, polished wood, and laid the rollers in precise alignment. Ropes of woven agave, thick and supple, coiled like sleeping serpents. Strong arms looped them around the block's girth. Their hands, calloused, scarred, unyielding, tugged in unison. A shout cut the air, "Pull!" and they heaved. The block leapt forward, a beast awakened, muscles straining with each inch. Feet sank in the damp earth. They wove planks beneath the rollers, and inch by inch, the mountain's gift inched toward destiny. The procession moved westward, along a path carved by earlier hands. Fields of maize, small and promising, framed the route. Woven baskets of harvested grain rested on stone pedestals, offerings to sustain both labor and God. Onlookers paused their work to watch the stone pass, bowed heads giving silent tribute. From distant terraces came whistles, signals from scouts, ensuring the way was clear, that the block would not stray into the shallow riverbed below.
Night brought respite and revelation. Beneath a sky crowded with stars, the builders whispered stories. Children nestled by embers, elders spoke of Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror god whose breath shaped valleys and guided fate. They shared the tale of Chicomecahuatl, the 7 serpents who brought maize to hungry mouths. In these stories, the weight of the stone seemed less burdensome. Each block was part of a divine design, each scar a chapter in a cosmic narrative. When the first light of the second dawn bled across the horizon, the block stood at the city's gate. A great portal framed by twin columns, each carved with jaguar claws tearing through vines, beckoned its arrival. Priests, draped in obsidian-studded robes, greeted the travelers. They held bowls of poke, the sacred fermented drink. The builders knelt, bowed their heads, and accepted the cool liquid. Each sip renewed strength. Each breath reaffirmed purpose. Inside the city, the heart of Teotihuacan revealed itself, a burgeoning grid of streets as straight as arrow flight. Hovering above, the peak of the Pyramid of the Sun shimmered in early light. The block was bound again, this time for the pyramid's western face. The path wound between residential compounds painted bright red and yellow. Murals depicted dancing priests, floating jaguars, and harvest ceremonies. Even art carried the weight of devotion. A sloping ramp, part earth, part rubble, part sweat, snaked upward. Wooden scaffolds flanked its sides, supporting platforms for mortar mixing and tool sharpening. Wheels were not yet known here. Instead, the builders innovated with sledges, flat wooden frames with leather runners. They attached the block with thick hides, greased with river clay to reduce friction. 200 men, their bodies taut as bowstrings, grasped the ropes. A master mason raised his staff. A stone whistle sounded, and they pulled. Inch by inch, the block groaned, shoulders burned, feet slipped, yet they pulled. Rhythmic chants rose, low at first.
then crescendoing as the block neared the next platform. They paused. They lifted stone gourds of water to their lips. Words of prayer mixed with sweat as they implored the mountain gods to ease their burden. Then they pulled again. By midday, they had ascended halfway. Shaded rest areas, woven reed awnings tethered to upright poles, provided brief refuge. Here, women offered maize cakes smeared with avocado paste. Children brought baskets of small obsidian flakes, tokens of good luck. Even the youngest hands touched the ropes, believing that courage was passed from palm to palm, generation to generation. Under the relentless sun, the final push began. The ramp narrowed, the block quivered on ledge edges. The tension was tangible. With a collective heave and a shout that echoed across the valley, they crossed the threshold. The block sat at the pyramid's breast, a raw, angular stone awaiting its final position.
Masons guided it into place with wooden levers and stone shims. Mortar, a mixture of ground limestone and cactus juice, was pressed into seams. They tapped each corner to eliminate gaps. From tiny cracks, they smoothed plaster. Their hands, once locked in frigid quarry air, now moved with delicate precision. The block became temple wall, seamlessly woven into the living tapestry of stone. As afternoon shadows stretched, painters arrived. They traced flowing serpents across the block's face. Feathered motifs curled toward the sun. Sun rays accented golden glands. They worked quickly, each stroke guided by ritual. When the final pigment dried, the new wall whispered life. At sunset, priests led a procession. At its heart, the newly placed stone. They carried flaming torches in ornate holders, illuminating the ancient limestone. Drummers beat a steady pulse. Flutes answered with rising tones. The procession circled the Pyramid of the Sun thrice, each lap marking the city's 3 founding clans. Afterward, priests poured bowls of pulque over the new stones in a libation to Tlaloc, god of rain. Cool liquid flowed down the walls, blessing both stone and sky. The builders knelt on cool plaza stones, their bodies spent, their hearts soaring. They had not merely moved a block. They had moved mountains, both literal and metaphorical. In their hands lay the power to reshape Earth, to channel belief, to craft a home for generations yet unborn. As twilight deepened, torches winked out. The city exhaled, settling into a hush. Stars appeared, silent witnesses to human triumph. The builders returned to their compounds, small rooms carved around central courtyards. Children drifted to sleep, fires burned low, and the pyramid stood silently behind them, its new stones glimmering under the moon. Tomorrow, another block would be freed, another story told, another chapter carved in stone. In the lives of these nameless artisans, Teotihuacan found its rhythm, a cadence of labor and faith, innovation and reverence. And in that cadence lay the essence of a civilization that would move not only mountains, but the hearts of all who came after. Morning light filtered through drifting dust, gilding the broad expanse of the Plaza of the Sun. Thousands of stones, flattened, polished, aligned, formed a vast carpet that stretched between the Pyramid of the Sun to the east and the Pyramid of the Moon to the west. Here, under an open sky, life in Teotihuacan found its chorus. A woman in a woven tunic carried a cradle on her back, its infant stirring to her heartbeat. She stepped onto the plaza, each footfall echoing against the stones. She paused at a painted merker, a sun disk encircled by serpents, its rays pointing toward distant hills. She whispered a prayer, pressing her hand to the warmed stone. Her plea was humble, for rain, for maize, for health. The plaza held each prayer like a vessel. Not far off, a group of merchants arranged their stalls. Obsidian blades caught the dawn's brilliance. Jade beads glimmered like captured stars. Seashells, tokens of distant coasts, rested in woven baskets dyed orange and red. Buyers haggled in clipped voices, hands sweeping across displays as though swiping away doubt. Each exchange was an affirmation of the city's reach, a dialogue between local crafts and far-off wonders. Above them, a young scribe traced glyphs in the air with a charcoal stick. He referenced lines etched into a low boundary wall, cataloging arrivals, departures, offerings. His mother had taught him to read the stone's hidden meanings, that a shell meant ocean, that a hummingbird stood for movement, that a handprint marked unity. He recorded offerings laid at the plaza's center, flowers from highland gardens, feathers harvested at dawn, clay vessels filled with maize beer. Each symbol was a voice, each tally a hymn. By mid-morning, the plaza thrummed with ritual. Priests emerged, their headdresses heavy with quetzal plumes. They walked in pairs, voices raised in chant. Their song wove through the crowd, an invocation of the sun's power, a summons of ancestral spirits, an appeal to bring balance between earth and sky. The chant rose, then dipped, matching the plaza's gentle breeze as it coaxed dust motes into dance. At the pyramid's base, dancers formed a circle. Their movements were precise yet flowing, arms like serpents, legs like pulsing springs of maize. Bells attached to their ankles tinkled with each step, blending percussion with the priest's drums. They interpreted creation myths, the first maize seeds sprouting from the earth, the rain clouds' tears nourishing fields, the sun's ascent granting promise of life. Spectators watched in reverent silence, absorbing each gesture as if the performance might stitch its magic into their own bones. Meanwhile, traders beckoned flocks of visitors deeper into the city's arteries. Narrow alleyways revealed neighborhood compounds, clusters of multi-room dwellings opening onto shared courtyards. Women grinded maize on stone metates. Children chased small dogs through tunnels of carved limestone. Smoke curled upward from kitchen hearths, scented with chilies and squashes roasting by open flame. The city's pulse moved from Grand Plaza to intimate courtyard, a living mosaic of shared existence.
At the plaza's western edge, a master architect surveyed the scene. He wore a tunic edged in dyed weft, a simple symbol of his status. In one hand, he held a measuring rod carved from yew. He charted the sun's path, noting the angle at which its rays would strike the pyramid of the moon at the solstice. He calculated shadows and brilliance, envisioning ceremonies yet to come, moments when the sun's glow would align with carved niches, unveiling hidden glyphs that spoke of cosmic balance. His vision united geometry and faith, mathematics and ritual. Not all voices were human. In the plaza's niches, priests tended sacred fires. They fed small bundles of copal resin into the flames. The resin hissed and smoked, filling the air with a honeyed aroma. Birds, quail, doves, hummingbirds gathered on the plaza's fringes, pecking at spilled grains or chasing insects stirred by the crowd. Their presence was no accident. They symbolized the interplay of earth and sky, life and spirit. As midday heat swelled, an elderly potter emerged from a nearby workshop. Her hands were gnarred with years of kneading clay. She carried a new vessel, an offering jar painted with geometric motifs. She placed it carefully at the base of a carved stela, 3 interlocked circles framed by stepped pyramids. She whispered farewell to her creation, trusting it would carry her gratitude into the world of gods. Each pot she made was more than utilitarian. It was a testament to her lineage, a link in an unbroken chain of makers stretching back to the city's birth. In the plaza's center, a gathering took shape. A priest raised a conch shell to his lips. From its mouth emerged a keening sound, deep, resonant, like the breath of the earth itself. The plaza fell silent. Even the birds quieted. The priest's signal rippled through the crowd. Men, women, and children knelt. They closed their eyes. In that hush, hearts beat as one. The conscious reverberations lingered, uniting time and space in a single note. Then came the moment. A beam of sunlight pierced the plaza, striking a polished stone altar. It caught the resin smoke and the dancers' bells and the merchants' laughter all at once. Shimmering, the altar's surface flashed like liquid gold. The crowd exhaled, joy mingled with awe. They felt the divine brush their skin. As afternoon edged toward dusk, the plaza's energy shifted. Vendors packed their wares. Dancers folded their skirts and returned to domestic tasks. Priests extinguished embers in the brazier and wound down chants into gentle humming. The architect tucked away his measuring rod, knowing tomorrow's angles would beckon him again. The infant's cradle, now heavier with sleep, was returned to the woman's back, her prayer answered with the comfort of routine. Under a sky brushed with rose and violet, the plaza emptied but did not sleep. Torches flared in courtyards. Music drifted from hidden courtyards, flutes coaxing twilight serenades. Night markets flickered to life, offering roasted fruit and spiced maize cakes. Even after ceremonial hush, the city's heartbeat persisted, louder under cloak of darkness. In the hush before midnight, the plaza stones cooled. Memories settled into the cracks and seams, a ledger of every footstep, every whisper, every offering. If one listened closely, they might hear faint echoes of the day, the merchant's calls, the dancer's bells, the conch's final note. Voices that once rose in unity now slumbered in limestone, waiting for dawn to call them forth again. Teotihuacan's soul lay not in its temples alone, but in its people's communion beneath open skies. In that plaza, ordinary lives intersected with the sacred. Life and faith, labor and ritual, commerce and ceremony, they fused in an eternal dance. And as long as stones endured and breath sustained, the voices in the Plaza of the Sun would continue to speak, weaving the story of a civilization that dared to place its heart in the open air and let the world witness its song.
At the southern end of the Avenue of the Dead, where shadows lengthened and winds whispered in a language only gods and architects understood, a monument rose from the earth like a vision. It was unlike the other pyramids, smaller in size, yet charged with a potency that made even priests pause. They called it the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. The stone facade was alive with eyes. Serpentine heads jutted outward, jaw open, fangs bared, plumes radiating like fire from their brows. Between them, shells, fanged masks, and curling symbols wrapped around the walls in rhythmic procession. No two faces were identical. Each one stared outward, as if remembering something terrible or warning of something to come. At its center, Quetzalcoatl, the Feathered Serpent, a being of contradiction, sky and earth, wind and root, beauty and blood. He was not simply a god to be worshipped. He was a mirror, a challenge, a promise. For the builders of Teotihuacan, he represented the impossible union of opposites. And to approach his temple meant more than prayer. It meant transformation. Stone by stone, they had raised his temple over generations, not by imperial command, but by collective will. Every carved serpent had passed through countless hands. Each feathered swirl was a memory of chisels against stone, of pigments ground in slow circles, of breath held in reverence. Some say the artists fasted before painting. Others say they slept beside the temple walls, listening for dreams whispered by gods. The temple was not only art, it was architecture imbued with mystery. Beneath its visible levels lay hidden tunnels, caverns of darkness, lined with pyrite to mimic starlight, liquid mercury pools, tiny figurines buried with ritual precision. Some chambers held offerings, greenstone masks, obsidian blades, necklaces of bone and shell. Others held silence, sealed rooms untouched since the day they were filled. They were not tombs. They were questions, messages to the divine, carved in secrecy and buried beneath the eyes of gods. During equinox festivals, the temple became the epicenter of the city's soul. Pilgrims from distant regions arrived in waves. Some came barefoot, others with packs full of maize, chili, or turquoise. They followed the Avenue of the Dead, their shadows growing longer as they neared the temple's gaze. When they reached it, they knelt, heads bowed, arms outstretched. Priests ascended the stairs in full regalia, feathered capes rustling, faces painted in ceremonial red and black. From the highest platform, they scattered offerings into the wind, petals, feathers, ground mica that caught the sun and shimmered like dust from another world. Drums began low. Flutes answered with wailing notes that bent the air. It was not music, it was invocation. At the altar's peak, sacrifices were made, not always of blood, but often. Obsidian blades kissed wrists or chests. The blood was caught in clay bowls and mixed with pigment. Priests painted it onto glyphs, animating stories on stone. Some say the sacrifices were volunteers, those who dreamed of the gods and longed to join them. Others say not all were willing. The truth is buried in silence.
Yet even the rituals of blood were wrapped in purpose. The feathered serpent was not a god of cruelty. He demanded balance. Sacrifice was not punishment, it was reciprocity. To receive life, one must give. The city thrived on this belief. Every pyramid, every mural, every ceremony echoed that exchange. The temple was proof, devotion shaped in stone. Children played in its shadow. Their laughter drifted up the steps and into the serpent's gaping mouths. They wore feathered masks, mimicking the god with flailing arms and hissing sounds. Their games were watched by elders who had once climbed the same stairs, who had placed obsidian fragments between the serpent's teeth and whispered prayers for rain. The temple was a place of awe, but also of familiarity. It lived among the people. At night, the structure transformed. Torches lit the mouths of the serpents. Shadows danced along the reliefs. The plaza below filled with murmurs. Dancers, night traders, whispering lovers. Moonlight spilled across the temple's edge, catching the mica dust still lingering from the day's offerings. It shimmered like water. The temple seemed to breathe. Beneath the plaza, archaeologists of our age would one day find hidden chambers, evidence of rituals long lost. Pyrite mirrors, small jaguar figurines, and sealed paths that led nowhere, or everywhere. They would find traces of mercury, liquid and bright, pooled in ancient troughs like offerings to stars. But even they would struggle to explain the full meaning. The temple, like the god it honored, refused to give up all its secrets. It wasn't just a monument, it was a threshold, a crossing between human and divine, body and wind, known and unknowable. The builders who raised it did not seek to conquer nature. They sought to understand it, to live within its pulse, to etch eternity into the clay of their world. And perhaps they succeeded. For even now, as the centuries gather like dust upon the past, the temple of the Feathered Serpent remains, its eyes unblinking, its mouth forever open. A monument not to power, but to mystery. Not to conquest, but to reverence. And beneath its gaze, we are all pilgrims, wondering what it meant to build something that dared to hold the sky.
Not every story of Teotihuacan was written in stone. Some were whispered between walls of painted plaster, or shared across steaming bowls of atoll at dawn. Most were never recorded, only lived. Yet it is here, in the quiet breath of daily life, that the soul of the city truly lived. Beyond the grand pyramids and sacred plazas stretched an intricate patchwork of neighborhoods, residential compounds crafted not by rulers, but by generations of families who shaped their world with patience, rhythm, and care. These were not the crowded slums of a crumbling empire, but planned, ordered spaces, modest palaces for the many. Enclosed by thick walls of stone and adobe, each compound held multiple families, sometimes entire lineages. Their homes faced inward, toward shared courtyards where life unfolded in a cycle both timeless and tender. At first light, a mother would rise to grind maize on her metate. The rasping sound echoed softly through the courtyard, joined by the laughter of her children chasing each other in a blur of cloth and bare feet. From a nearby chamber, a potter prepared his clay. Softening it with water,
shaping it with hands that knew its moods. He worked under a reed canopy, the sun not yet hot enough to crack the vessels too soon. In one compound, a feather worker arranged long green plumes from the quetzal bird, precious, iridescent, and sacred. He stitched them to wooden masks with obsidian eyes. His fingers moved delicately, as if fearing the feathers might dissolve under too much pressure. His craft was revered. His clients often priests preparing for festivals or travelers bringing gifts for distant lords. But here, in the calm of his home, he worked to the rhythm of birdsong and the bubbling of cooking pots. Children learned by watching. A girl crouched beside her aunt, watching her twist cotton thread on a spindle. A boy mimicked the arm motion of his grandfather, a stonemason, pretending to carve symbols into dirt with a stick. There were no formal classrooms, but the city itself was a living school. Each courtyard a page, each wall a lesson, each tool a teacher. The walls, yes, the walls. They were not blank. Many were painted, layered with murals that showed not just deities and myths, but stories of people. Farmers offering maize to the rain god, women dancing with jars on their heads, warriors adorned in jaguar skins stepping between fire and wind. The colors were vivid: red ochre, turquoise blue, smoky black, and even faded by time, they still murmured of motion and meaning. Meals brought everyone together. On mats around the fire, families shared roasted squash, beans cooked with epazote, and tortillas still warm from the comal. Salt was precious, so was honey. On special days, tamales were steamed in earthen pots, flavored with chilies and wrapped in banana leaves. The food was more than sustenance. It was memory, heritage, celebration. At dusk, musicians emerged, not for performance, but for pleasure. One might play a flute carved from bone. Another tapped a turtle shell with a stick. A woman shook a rattle of clay and stone. Children danced, arms raised, feet light. Their laughter rose above the rooftops, blending with the calls of nightbirds and the hush of cooling stone. Every courtyard had its guardian spirits. Small household altars stood tucked in corners, miniature temples adorned with offerings. A child's first lost tooth might be left there, or a shard of painted pottery cracked during firing. These acts were small, but deeply felt. They weren't gestures of fear, but of gratitude. To the city, to the ancestors, to the unseen rhythms that held everything together. But not all life in Teotihuacan was gentle. Behind the walls, as in any great city, there were tensions. A shared compound meant shared space, shared firewood, shared quarrels. Jealousies bloomed, and sometimes disputes were brought to neighborhood councils. Elders who sat in half circles, listening, weighing, judging with slow nods and tired eyes. Punishments were rarely violent. A fine, a task, a ritual act of atonement. Harmony mattered more than vengeance. There was no royal palace in Teotihuacan, no known throne, no name carved into stone as supreme ruler. Power was dispersed. Nobility existed, but it was a quiet kind. Influence was earned through deeds, through alliances, through proximity to sacred tasks. The stone carver who worked on a pyramid was as honored as the priest who interpreted the stars. The weaver who dressed a god's image held power in her loom. It was a city of roles, of interdependence, not subjugation. Trade bound the people together. In markets, a pot of honey might be exchanged for a jaguar tooth. a bundle of cacao traded for salt from the distant lake beds. Everyone was both seller and buyer. Everyone participated. Even children learned the art of exchange early, offering carved toys or painted stones to each other, with solemn eyes and exaggerated haggling. In the dry season, prayers turned more fervent. Women walked in procession with bowls of water balanced on their heads. Men dug trenches to preserve moisture in crops. Priests read the signs in the sky. But there was no panic, only continuity. Teotihuacan was too old, too wise to fear the turning of a season. It had lived through drought, fire, and flood before. It would do so again. And in that knowledge of impermanence, of ritual, of cycles, there was a quiet strength. The kind found not in armies or laws, but in mortar between bricks. In the smile of a child as she grinds maize for the first time. In the worn path between one home and another, where generations have walked and will walk still. This was the heart of Teotihuacan. Not its temples, not its mysteries, but its people. Their lives lived not in grandeur, but in quiet brilliance. Between walls and streets, in the spaces history often overlooks, but where true civilization always blooms.
The city was built on stone, but it was bound by something older. Older than mortar, older than mathematics. Beneath the avenues and pyramids, beneath the murals and chants, there pulsed a quiet truth. That life demanded offering. That nothing lasted without cost. And in Teotihuacan, that cost was sacrifice. It began not in death, but in rhythm. At sunrise, the Temple of the Sun cast its long shadow across the Avenue of the Dead. The shadow crept slowly, predictably, touching the corners of sacred plazas and the thresholds of neighborhood altars. This movement was more than light. It was time, ritualized and made sacred. As the sun rose, so did drums. Deep, slow, resonant. Like a heartbeat rising from the earth. With it came the steps of dancers. Feathered, masked, eyes sharp and steady. In the Plaza of the Moon, a group of women circled a brazier, each carrying a bowl of flowers, seeds, or crushed maize. They moved in silence, their feet marking the packed dust in practiced patterns. They were not performers, they were participants. Their purpose, to give something, to return a measure of life to the gods who shaped it. Not all sacrifices were bloody. In many ways, the most powerful were not. A child offering her first woven bracelet. A farmer burying the season's first maize cob in his courtyard. A feather worker placing a single perfect plume into the wind, trusting it would find the gods on its way. These acts, so simple, so deeply human, were the city's breath. They gave texture to faith. They made belief a living thing. But there were days when the city asked for more. On festival mornings, the air thickened with copal smoke and expectation. Crowds gathered before the great temples, eyes lifted, hearts clenched. Priests emerged, painted in black and red, their garments alive with shells and feathers. In their hands, knives of obsidian, sharper than bone, colder than night. The chosen were brought forth. Some were warriors captured in faraway valleys. Others, local volunteers. Yes, there were those who stepped forward willingly.
men and women who dreamed of joining the gods, of becoming more than flesh. They were not mad. They were celebrated, fed, adorned, sung to. Their families wept, not with shame, but with reverence. Death, when given, became a doorway, a return, a beginning.
Rituals followed strict form, the plaza silenced, the sun aligned, the heart, still beating, lifted skyward in a single fluid motion. Blood spilled onto the altar, mingling with crushed flowers, powdered jade, and sacred ash. The priests murmured words older than the pyramids, and for a moment, the sky seemed to hold its breath. Then the drums resumed, not mournful, triumphant, because sacrifice was not about loss. It was about exchange. It was about honoring the balance between human and divine. The builders knew this. The farmers knew this. The mothers who lit incense knew this. Even children watching from shadowed corners understood. Nothing came from nothing. This belief wove itself into the city's very design. The orientation of streets, the placement of altars. The murals, too, told the story. Jaguars giving blood for rain. Serpents shedding skin for rebirth. Gods dissolving into fire so that the sun might rise. Everywhere, reminders. To receive was to offer. To live was to share in the world's eternal debt. One mural, hidden deep within a residential compound, showed a line of figures, each holding out a heart, each heart flowering into maize. No text, no explanation, just image. And in that image, the entire worldview of Teotihuacan, life feeding life. Even architecture carried the burden of offering. When new temples were built, layers of the old were buried beneath them, ritual entombments of sacred space. In one excavation, archaeologists uncovered a sealed room beneath the pyramid of the Feathered Serpent. Inside, hundreds of tiny obsidian blades, dozens of carved figurines, a cache of jaguar bones. The room had no door. It was not meant to be seen again. It was not decoration. It was sacrifice. The people didn't speak of gods in abstract. The gods were in the soil, in the stone, in the sky's breath. And those gods, like the sun and the rain, needed to be fed. Not always with blood, but always with something precious, something that mattered. And so they gave. Not only in temples, but in life. A potter breaking her best vessel on the solstice, knowing it could not be surpassed. A merchant leaving behind the rarest bead in a cave shrine. A father cutting a lock of his daughter's hair and placing it in a basket offered to Tlaloc. All were part of the same truth, that creation required loss, that the world turned not on greed, but on generosity. At night, when the city slept, priests walked the quiet avenues with bowls of fire and words on their tongues. They visited altars, fed the flames, whispered thanks for the day just lived. In the stillness, they could feel it, the hum of a city that understood its place. Not above the earth, not beneath it, but within it. And in that hum, low, constant, powerful, one could almost hear
the promise made by every citizen, every priest, every mother, every builder. We give so that all may endure. The roads that led from Teotihuacan were not just paths through the dust. They were veins, carrying lifeblood outward and drawing wonders home. And the city, though rooted in stone, was never still. It breathed through its merchants, its markets, and the travelers who arrived with calloused feet and eyes wide with reverence. From the highlands, obsidian flowed like dark water, sharp, brittle, precious. From the Gulf Coast came seashells that sang of distant tides. Cacao, dried and bitter, traveled from the rainforests in bundles wrapped with palm leaves. From the north came salt, crystallized by sun and patience. From the south, feathers, green as jungle, red as flame, delicate as breath. The merchants were no mere traders. They were envoys, interpreters, risk-takers. Called Pocteca in later tongues, they were the lifeline of the city's influence. They walked for weeks, even months, following the jagged ridges of volcanoes, skirting canyons and river valleys. They knew the language of smoke signals, the location of safe rest stops, the dangers of bandits, and the customs of foreign lords. When they entered a new city, they carried with them not only goods, but ideas, images, colors, and stories. Teotihuacan had no empire in the traditional sense. No conquering armies fanned out under a single banner. Instead, it spread like a whisper. In murals found hundreds of miles away, Teotihuacan's motifs appear. Its pyramids, its masks, its gods with wide eyes and curling flames. Its influence was cultural, not martial. It arrived not with the blade, but with the mirror. In the central market plaza, traders returned like migrating birds, their bundles bulging with news as much as with goods. Children ran to greet them, fingers reaching for glints of jade or feathers bright as morning. Elders listened for tales of cities where water flowed through painted canals, of kings who rode in litters of gold, of mountain valleys where the sun never quite touched the floor. The city itself reflected this diversity. One compound in the southern district bore murals in Maya style, curved glyphs, foreign gods, lush jungle scenes. The people there spoke in a softer tongue, a rolling rhythm unlike the clipped cadences of the valley. They were not visitors, they were residents. Teotihuacan welcomed them, as it welcomed all who brought something of value, not gold or conquest, but culture. Artisans adapted foreign forms with ease. A potter might learn a new firing technique from a visitor from the Mixtec lands. A muralist might borrow a color scheme from the coast. Nothing was fixed. Everything evolved. And yet it remained uniquely Teotihuacan, a city where every borrowed voice became part of the chorus, every foreign thread part of the weave. There were rituals, too, that came from elsewhere. Priests from distant hills introduced dances with new steps. Incantations in foreign syllables joined the sacred chants. The gods did not seem to mind. They were vast, patient, and many. Teotihuacan was not a jealous city. It was hungry for knowledge, for beauty, for connection. In the courtyards, this hunger played out daily. A family might drink cacao before a meal, a practice borrowed from the South. Children played with clay toys shaped like animals never seen in the valley. Stories passed from trader to craftsman to child until they settled into local myth. A crocodile god from a distant marsh became, in Teotihuacan hands, a guardian of maize fields. A southern tale of twin heroes was painted into a mural at the foot of the Pyramid of the Moon. Trade brought wealth, yes, but more importantly, it brought meaning. Teotihuacan was not just a place. It was a point of convergence, a crossroads of the sacred and the ordinary. Every bundle unpacked in the market was a gesture of connection. Every mural was a dialogue across mountains. Every borrowed word spoken in a courtyard whispered, "We are not alone." Even the city's architecture mirrored this openness. The Grand Avenue was aligned not only with the sun, but with routes to neighboring valleys. The orientation was both celestial and geographical. It pointed outward, inviting movement, traffic, return. The obsidian workshops, bustling enclaves of spark and dust, produced blades that found their way to distant altars. Teotihuacan obsidian has been discovered hundreds of kilometers away, in sites that never once saw the city itself, yet felt its breath through a single shard. And what came back? Stories, always stories. Of other gods, other ways of being, of floating gardens, of moonlit ceremonies, of cities with rivers so wide one could not see across. These stories layered onto Teotihuacan's own mythologies, like sediment forming stone. The city expanded not in territory, but in imagination. Merchants died on the road sometimes. Their bodies were laid beneath altars, their names remembered in hushed tones. They were not mourned as victims, but honored as bridges, those who walked the edge of the known and brought back fire. In later centuries, other cities would mimic Teotihuacan's forms. They would raise pyramids shaped in its likeness, paint eyes in its style, worship gods it once honored. Yet none would capture its essence fully, because Teotihuacan was never about replication. It was about convergence, synthesis, becoming more by inviting more. And perhaps that was its greatest legacy. Not stone, not empire, not wealth, but movement. The motion of thought, of faith, of craft. A city forever shifting, never static, held together by trade winds and open doors. The city that invited the world and, for a time, became it. It did not fall in a day. No city ever does. For centuries, Teotihuacan had grown like a living body, arteries of stone, lungs of open plaza, a heart of ritual and fire. It pulsed with life, breathed through trade and faith. And then, slowly, imperceptibly at first, it began to hold its breath. The signs were not loud. A well ran dry. A granary yielded less. A mural was painted over rather than restored. These were not catastrophes, but murmurs, quiet shifts in rhythm, like a heartbeat beginning to stutter. The rains changed. Some summers they came late, others not at all. Maize grew stunted. Fields once golden rippled with emptiness. Farmers tried prayers, then canals, then new seeds. But the land had grown tired. Or perhaps the gods had. Even the most faithful began to wonder if the smoke rising from their altars was reaching anything at all. The people turned inward. Markets still bustled, but the laughter changed. It thinned, as if stretched too far. Traders returned with fewer goods. Roads once alive with song now echoed with footsteps that felt cautious, watchful. The reach of Teotihuacan, once vast and unquestioned, began to retreat, not because of war, but because of weariness. There were whispers, not from invaders, but from within. The compounds, once tight, cooperative spaces, grew tense. A neighbor withheld water from the shared channel. A mason demanded more obsidian for less work. Elders found their advice ignored. The cohesion that had once held thousands together like fibers in a weave began to loosen, slowly, reluctantly. At the Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent, the murals changed. The bright gods faded. In their place, images of bound captives, warriors with raised clubs, priests with fire in their eyes. The faces no longer smiled. They warned. Somewhere along the Avenue of the Dead, a fire was lit, not in a brazier, but against a wall. It blackened a mural. The next day, another. Some said it was protest. Others said it was cleansing. No one claimed responsibility, but the message was clear. Something had broken. In the southern sectors, compounds were abandoned. People moved inward, clustering close to the central avenue. Peripheral shrines were left unguarded. Offerings were fewer. Bones of unburied dogs gathered in dry courtyards. Animals once fed, now forgotten. A slow, quiet unraveling. There were still rituals, still festivals, but something had changed in the way people danced. It was tighter, louder, as if movement alone could fend off the creeping silence. The drums pounded harder, but the rhythm felt forced. One day, a compound gate was found sealed from the inside. No one answered the calls. When neighbors forced it open, they found only ash, no bodies, no goods, only fire-marked stone, and a mural, half-scraped, showing a figure with a serpent's tongue and eyes closed to the world. Historians would later argue, was it drought, internal revolt, famine, external enemies? Perhaps all of them, or perhaps none. Teotihuacan did not leave us a simple answer. It left us ruins and the haunting suggestion that its greatest threat had always come from within. In time, parts of the city were burned, intentionally. Structures blackened, walls scorched. Some altars were defaced, others buried. The Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent, once the city's gleaming jewel, bore deep wounds. Statues smashed, eyes gouged, serpent heads shattered and cast into fire. It was not a conquest. It was a reckoning. And then, silence. Not absolute, not immediate, just deeper. The wind still blew, dogs still barked, but the Avenue of the Dead no longer echoed with feet. The markets grew still. The murals faded in the sun, unretouched. Roof beams collapsed one by one, with no one to replace them. The city, once vibrant with memory and movement, became still as stone. Those who remained lived among ghosts. They repurposed walls, made gardens in what were once courtyards, broke up plazas to plant beans. The grandeur faded, but life, stubborn as a sprout, continued. Children still played, Fire still crackled, but the vision, the shared heartbeat that had once defined Teotihuacan, was gone. Generations passed. New cities rose in the jungles and the valleys, each with their own gods, their own pyramids. They pointed to Teotihuacan as legend, a place where gods once walked, a city built by giants, a city swallowed by pride. They painted its symbols on their own walls, half tribute, half warning. None knew exactly what had happened. They only knew it had ended. The silence became part of the city. Tourists walk its streets today in awe. Archaeologists scrape gently at its corners, hoping for answers. But the city keeps its secrets. It does not shout. They only knew it had ended. The silence became part of the city. Tourists walk its streets today in awe. Archaeologists scrape gently at its corners, hoping for answers. But the city keeps its secrets. It does not shout. It remembers quietly. Through worn stone, through layers of ash, through murals that watch us with faded eyes. And in that silence, something remains. Not a fall, not a failure, but a transformation. Because Teotihuacan did not disappear. It became something else. Myth, memory, mirror. A reflection of what humans can build and what we can lose.
(150 to 160 words per minute, reduced to 130 for quotes). The city slept beneath its own bones. Centuries passed, forests shifted, rivers altered their course. Winds scoured murals, and roots pried open plazas. What remained was not abandoned, it was layered. Dust upon stone, silence upon silence. And in that burial, Teotihuacan waited. Not forgotten, only concealed. The people who came after felt its pull. Toltecs, Aztecs, pilgrims, farmers. They climbed its pyramids, ran fingers over its carvings, whispered names that didn't quite match the ones first spoken here. They gave it a new title, Teotihuacan, the place where gods were born. It wasn't the name of its builders. That name, like so much else, had vanished. But the city's presence endured. It couldn't be erased. The Aztecs stood in awe before its grandeur. How could anyone, they wondered, have raised such a city? With what power? What knowledge? They imagined giants, divine architects, ancestors so wise they could speak to stars. They didn't excavate, they worshipped. They walked the avenue of the dead with offerings in their arms. They built altars near the Pyramid of the Sun. They believed the gods had first ignited the cosmos from this very place. And in that belief, they folded Teotihuacan into their own mythos. This was no ruin to them, it was a sacred inheritance. And yet, what survived beneath their reverence was far more complex. Teotihuacan's true builders left clues, carefully, beneath each layer. Obsidian flakes buried in workshops, skeletons laid with jade beads, murals that bore witness in silence. Not stories told aloud, but stories pressed into the earth. Stories only patient hands could unearth. Centuries later, the hands returned. European colonizers stumbled upon the pyramids, their outlines still sharp against the sky. They didn't understand what they saw. They guessed, they speculated, they stole. Their maps marked it, but their hearts misread it. Then came the scholars, the diggers, the dreamers. Archaeologists brushed away centuries of wind and ash. They found staircases buried beneath collapsed ceilings, tunnels long sealed, still carrying the scent of ancient fire, mural fragments with pigments bright enough to feel alive, tombs not of kings, but of artisans, warriors, perhaps priests, people who lived by their hands and died by their oaths. They found no palaces, no thrones, no single name etched again and again in triumph. Instead, they found neighborhoods, workshops, offerings, a city built not by one, but by many. That was the true legacy.
Teotihuacan was not a monument to conquest. It was a monument to collaboration, to structure without tyranny, to power without spectacle, to vision without ego. Its influence had spread not through war, but through wonder. Other cities borrowed its geometry. Its gods traveled on painted walls. Its obsidian tools touched corners of the continent. Even in silence, it had shaped generations. In a way, that was its final miracle, that a city could disappear and still matter. Today, drones soar above its grids. Laser scans measure every crack. Researchers model its temples in 3 dimensions, trace pigment molecules to their mountain origins. But still, much eludes us. The names of its rulers, the sound of its speech, the reason it fell. And yet, something deeper speaks. In the echoes of bare footsteps climbing the pyramid of the moon. In the hush that falls when sunlight spills across the plaza of the sun at dusk. In the touch of a child's hand tracing the curve of a serpent's carved mouth. The city is speaking, still. Not in answers, but in presence. A presence that says, here, humans dreamed something vast, something ordered and sacred, something built not on domination, but devotion. Its legacy lives in layers, in soil and fire, in memory and myth. It lives in the lines of modern cities shaped by invisible grids, in stories still told by grandparents beneath that same vast sky, in the knowledge that we too can build not just structures, but meaning, not just walls, but wonder. Teotihuacan never asked to be eternal, and yet, because of how it lived, it is. The road is still there. Not the one you see on maps, not the paved strip with tour buses and camera flashes, but the original road, the one laid stone beneath the sun, wide as vision and lined with breath. The Avenue of the Dead, they call it now. But it was never about death. It was about passage, memory, becoming. Step onto it, and you feel the weight of time press softly against your chest. Teotihuacan does not speak in language. It speaks in space, in scale, in shadow. The city was designed to guide you, not just where to walk, but where to look, where to feel. Its axis aligned with the sun's setting on sacred days. Its pyramids framed the sky, inviting your gaze upward,
away from the dust of daily burdens. It didn't need words. It had geometry. And through that geometry, it whispered to every traveler, "You are not alone in this world. You are part of something wider. Step carefully. Stand still. Listen." Even now, it echoes. In the cities of central Mexico, in the glyphs of Maya scribes, in the myths passed down long after its people fell silent, Teotihuacan lives on. Its gods migrated, shape-shifting through time. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, would fly again, painted, sculpted, venerated in a dozen forms. Its murals echoed in far-off temples. Its obsidian tools glinted in distant tombs. Its style became canon, even when its name was forgotten. But the most enduring echo is not in stone. It is in the idea that strangers can come together and build something greater than themselves. That ritual can create order. That belief, when woven into architecture, becomes more than religion. It becomes community. No ruler's name survives. No imperial edict carved in triumph. And perhaps that is the point. Teotihuacan was not built to glorify a man. It was built to house a cosmos. Its order was not about control. It was about reflection. Its power not in conquest, but in cohesion. Its silence not emptiness, but restraint.
There are lessons here. In an age of noise, Teotihuacan reminds us that stillness can speak. In an age of towers reaching skyward for vanity, it reminds us that elevation can be sacred. In a world of borders and walls, it reminds us that great civilizations grow by opening, not closing themselves to the wider world. And so we return, year after year, footstep after footstep, drone after drone, not just to admire, but to remember, to feel what it is to be small under something made with purpose, to walk where others walked, carrying burdens, hopes, offerings, to wonder who they were, to recognize ourselves in the questions they left behind. Children still run along the avenue, their laughter bouncing between temple walls. Artists still come with sketch pads and reverence. Pilgrims, modern, uncertain, searching, still stand at the summit of the Pyramid of the Sun and raise their arms to nothing in particular and feel something. Not a voice, not a god, but an echo. A soft hum beneath the dust. A reminder that what we build, if built with love, with vision, with humility, can endure beyond our names, beyond our failings, beyond even memory. Teotihuacan is no longer a city. It is a silence that sings. It is a breath held across centuries. It is a question still unfolding. The wind still moves across the valley floor. It carries no banners, no names, no proclamations of conquest or fall, only dust and the soft murmur of memory. Teotihuacan has no single author, no crowned founder, no last defender at the gates. It does not offer the comfort of a tidy ending. What it offers is more powerful,
a lingering presence. A world shaped by thousands of hands, by dreams shared across generations, by a city that chose to build not for glory, but for meaning. Its greatness was not shouted, it was woven into obsidian, into mural, into ritual. It lives now in the quiet geometry of abandoned plazas, in the shimmer of mica under sunlight, in a cracked wall that still holds the echo of a dancer's step, a priest's chant, a mother's song. And perhaps that is Teotihuacan's final offering. Not a tale of rise and fall, but a question whispered across time. What will endure when our voices fade? Not names, but intentions. Not monuments of power, but places where people came together again and again to make the world sacred. In Teotihuacan, we are reminded that stone can speak if we learn to listen, that silence can teach if we approach it with humility, that greatness is not measured by conquest, but by coherence. The city still stands, weathered, waiting, watching. And in its stillness, it speaks to us, not of the past, but of possibility.